If you want to go into a bit more detail about the immune system, I have a whole other playlist based off my immunology module, but this one's going to be a bit of a immune system recap. So there are three main roles of the immune system. The first one being to recognise intruders. Then there's one to respond appropriately to intruders in order to protect the body. And then there's those that have to respond to the next invasion. It's also key in homeostasis for the removal of worn-out cells and abnormal cells via immunosurveillance. This helps reduce cancer risk. So the body has two main defence mechanisms. The first one being the physical barriers, so you've got your skin, your mucosal membranes, like in the linings of the mouth, nose and eyelids. You've got mucus and cilia of the airways. There's acids and enzymes, as well as cell shedding in the digestive system, and water passing. Then you've got the immune system, which consists of circulating cells that recognise and respond to foreign invaders via things like inflammation and fever. And there are three types of passive immunity: innate, adaptive or active, and passive immunity. Innate immunity is what we're born with, so it's always present and it acts in a non-selective manner. And it's a bit species specific, so because you're born with it, humans might have an innate immunity to one bacterial pathogen, whereas say a dog might not, because we're biologically different, so it's species specific. There's adaptive immunity, which develops throughout our lives, and it develops as we're exposed to disease or immunised through things like vaccines, and they result in very specific responses to the disease that they're exposed to. And then there's passive immunity, which is called borrowed immunity. This uses sort of ready-made antigens and antibodies from a different place, and it can be natural, such as when you're in your mum's womb, they can transfer across from your mum via the placenta or through breast milk, or artificial, such as short-term immunisation or transfer of antibodies. This allows for immediate protection but doesn't result in any sort of memory cells being developed. Antigens are antibody generating molecules, and molecules such as proteins, glycoproteins or polysaccharides that are in the plasma membrane that can produce an immune response. Whereas antibodies are proteins secreted by the immune cells in response to an antigen. They have a unique antigen binding site and lead to the destruction of antigen-bearing cells. They work in 4 different ways, so they can cause agglutination of the pathogens, making them clump together for easier phagocytosis. They release antitoxins to neutralise toxins produced by pathogenic bacteria. They cause lysis of the bacterial membranes, allowing for digestion. And they do opsonization, so they coat the pathogen in a protein that identifies them as foreign. And antibodies are produced by B lymphocytes. So inflammation is a type of immune response that has some typical symptoms. So there's usually redness, swelling, heat, pain, itching, and a weakness or loss of function. Cytokines play a big role in the process of inflammation. These are small proteins that are usually between 5 to 20 kilodaltons that are important in cell signalling. Their release has an effect on the behaviour of the cells around them, and the signalling can be one of 3 kinds, so you've got paracrine, endocrine or synaptic. If the cells are targeting cells around it, this is called paracrine signalling. If it's across a synapse, then this is synaptic signalling, which are considered local signalling methods. And there's also hormonal or endocrine signalling, which is more long distance, as hormones are secreted into the blood and travel to target cells throughout the body. There are a number of different stimuli for acute inflammation, some being infections, trauma, necrosis, so cell death, the presence of foreign bodies, so pathogens, and as hypersensitivity. There are a few stages to inflammation, and in the earliest stages you get dilation of small blood vessels. This leads to increased blood flow called vasodilation, which leads to the redness as the blood is close to the surface of the skin. You get increased permeability of microvascular, which means that proteins and leukocytes can enter the surrounding tissue. This causes the swelling. And there's also immigration of leukocytes from the microcirculation to accumulate at the injured tissue, and they are activated to eliminate the offending agent, so things like pathogens. This causes the heat, the fever, and the itching. So, as I said earlier about the increased permeability, you get numerous proteins, fluids, and immune cells leaving the blood vessels. So exudate is an extravascular fluid that has a high protein concentration. It contains things like cell debris, and its presence indicates vessel permeability and tissue inflammation due to the dead cells. Edema states an excess of fluid in interstitial tissue. So you can get the presence of pus, which is a form of exudate that's very rich in neutrophils. Sort of like the yellow stuff you see sitting on fresh wounds. Going a bit back to the immigration of leukocytes, once a leukocyte leaves the bloodstream, it migrates towards the injury or inflammation by a process called transmigration. They do this via chemotaxis, which is a locomotion along a chemical gradient, so from an area of low to high density of cytokines. Later on in inflammation, you have things like neutrophils arriving to the site of injury during the first 6 to 24 hours, which are then followed by macrophages between the 24 to 48 hour time period. Both of these cells can carry out phagocytosis, and they can also produce growth factors to induce tissue repair. Inflammation is actually a really powerful first line of defence, so when the causative agent is eliminated, it needs to stop, otherwise it can actually harm healthy tissues. Because of this, mediators of acute inflammation such as the neutrophils are quite short-lived, and they have short half-lives and degenerate after they're released.